Another week, another Wallabies victory, and Matt Toomua, isn't it just good to be talking about a bit of success?
Yeah, it's easy, this thing, isn't it? Oh God, yep. What, three from three? And look, I think before it we were saying, look, if we can somehow get 3 from 3, that's no mean feat. Considering the year we've had, the changes, everything. Refusing to select guys overseas, something I was critical of, but seems like Joe's schmitted in, as they say.
Well, we'll get to the Rugby Championship in a little bit, but Eddie Jones picked 5 players from overseas for the Rugby Championship. We'll discuss a little bit about that, but what we do know is that in the first 3 matches, Joe Schmidt is 3 from 3. Eddie Jones only managed 2 wins from 9 tests last year. Obviously, a fair bit about the opposition and perhaps where they're playing had a little bit to do with that. But we're going to talk a lot more about that to come. Andrew Slack, the former Wallabies captain, Wallabies great, going to be joining. He had a special reunion on Friday with Gordon Bray and several other Queenslanders and Wallabies up at Ballymore. So it'll be good to check in with him. He was also part of the review committee that ran their eyes over the high performance sector in Australian rugby at the back end of last year. So it'll be interesting if we can get any insights into that. But also Anthony Eddy, former Wallabies Australian Sevens general manager, spent a long time in the game here, but also a long time over in Ireland where he managed to get the Sevens program up and running and humming alongside David Nusafora. So he will have a lot to say about the Olympics, which is quickly and so soon on the horizon, but also Joe Schmidt having worked with that Irish program. So a lot coming up on this edition of the Raw Rugby podcast. Yeah, so Matt, happy days, mate. 40-29 over Georgia, 6 tries to 4, a double each to Fraser McWright, Rob Valentini, tries as well to Paisami and Isaac Kalea. What did you like about the win over Georgia on Saturday afternoon? 26,000 there, not 21,000 as I initially said in the instant reaction, but a healthy enough crowd with 26,000.
Yeah, definitely. Look, there was a lot to like. A lot of points scored. You could actually start seeing a bit of Joe Schmidt's attacking plan. I think that came quite evident. Obviously, first game, there would have been a few growing pains or whatever, and then second game became quite wet. So whereas this one, afternoon footy, so a lot of short passes, guys really showing their skill, getting to that breakdown quickly. Around the middle parts of the field, probably held onto the ball a bit more than traditionally I think we've seen a lot of teams, which I think was working well. I think that'll be dependent on referees' interpretation of the ruck. I think if they're favouring the attacking team, then yeah, look, it's worthwhile playing in that middle part of the field, because if you do get a penalty, you go for the line. So yeah, and ruthless in the attacking 22. We had Laurie on here a while ago, didn't we, earlier in the year, and he spoke about the Brumbies missing those attacking 22 opportunities, and you can see that they've clearly put a lot of emphasis on it, keeping the ball in tight. And yeah, look, I've enjoyed it. I don't know about you. I've enjoyed seeing us do the basics well.
Yeah, and talking about the 22, how good was the initial try to Hunter Paisami? That's about as good as the Wallabies have played, because if you think about the scrum, it was amazing that the halfback got pulled up so soon by James Dolman, who did that with Ryan Lonergan earlier in the year. I think he took about 7 to 8 seconds to get that kick away before Dolman pulled it up, and that allowed the Wallabies to have a scrum from that Paisami scores. But if you look at the build-up, it was Danguna getting over the gain line, back to the blind side to Rob Valentini to get well over the advantage line. A nice interplay of passing to Tom Wright to get to about 5 metres out. And then you saw the Wallabies go straight to Ikitau, who lovely pair of hands, and put it Paisami in just a little bit of space, and he was too good just to cross. It reminded me of when the Waratahs scored against the Crusaders to give themselves a chance to go into Golden Point and then win the game, where Hannigan and Swinton got well over the gain line at Allianz. But that was just quality, quick, fast ruck speed, forwards doing their job. And yeah, I agree. I think that's the sort of play that we expect from a Joe Schmidt. Really cunning play from both sides of the ruck, manipulation there, but also really quick line speed. That was, probably my favourite aspect of the game.
Yeah, I think Jake White used to, whenever we had a scrum in the attacking 22, he would always talk about it being a foot race between you, like with the forwards, a foot race between you and the opposite number. And you should essentially win that foot race because you know where you're going because you've got the ball. And there was a bit about that. You know, Rob Valentini come back on the short side. They would have probably watched Georgia, knowing that Georgia liked to scrum long and stay in the scrum to try and get that dominance. And with that, there will be a little seam on the edge. And using a guy like Rob Valentini was very smart. And then just racing around the corner. So it was good. It was good footy. It was the type of try that you can kind of build off and that you can, you know, hopefully replicate in games against, you know, bigger opposition. So, yeah, look, we can only play the team that's in front of us, and we did that. And, I think you've got to be certainly pretty happy with some aspects there.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Wallabies getting out to a 19 points to 10 lead at halftime. We saw Georgia come back into a 26-24 off the back of the Danguna yellow that was upgraded to red. But it was tense. It was an exciting kind of frenetic start to that second half with the really fortuitous but well taken tries. But the Wallabies with probably a bit too much class, and you never really thought they were going to lose that match. We're going to talk a bit more about that and touch on Gordon Bray and the reunion there, but also the launch at Ballymore of his great book, The Immortals, with Andrew Slack on the other side of this. It's a very warm welcome to Andrew Slack. He's a man that we generally cross to around Bledisloe Cup, Eden Park, but we've thought, no. A couple of months early on this occasion, before the Rugby Championship, off the back of 3 wins in the July matches. Slacky, thanks for coming on the show.
Pleasure, mate. No, thank you.
Can you believe that we haven't just brought your number out and tried to get you for that Eden Park?
I'm feeling very wanted, mate. Very wanted.
It's a bit like Bublé getting or Mariah Carey coming in at Easter, isn't it? Just a bit earlier than usual.
Is that one of your favourites? Is it, Matt?
Oh God, yeah. Everyone loves Mariah Carey, I know, that time of year. But anyway, that being said, review. Where did you start, Slacky, with the review? Obviously, such an emotional year. Where does one start a review on such a season?
Well, I was a complete rookie at it, Matt, and Darlene Harrison, who sort of ran it, was the professional among us and does all that sort of stuff. She sort of chaired it, and then Justin Harrison was there, who knows about that stuff and is current. So I was the non-current person. But look, interesting what you just asked when you used the word emotion, because I was taken aback a bit by the emotions of the players. They were, they were sort of damaged is the wrong word, but they were pinged off. They weren't happy. I mean, whatever. Now, I'm not a current guy, and you can talk about the amateur era and various other eras, but whatever era you're in, you want to enjoy what you're doing. And what I learned early in that review was I thought, my interpretation was that it was very little enjoyment for a bunch of guys that should have really been enjoying themselves.
It was especially, you could see that the longer that the campaign went on as well. Like at the start, I think, and even at the early stages of the campaign, you could see that they were all buying into what occurred. But yeah, I think towards the end, there was a bit of a desire to get the hell out of France, which you shouldn't be wanting when you haven't reached the pointy end of the competition.
Yeah, look, it was strange. We spoke to all the guys, and well, not all. We reached out to all of them, and anyone who wanted to be a part of it, we would have a conversation. Most of it on Zoom, some face to face. So some guys didn't put their hand up; they weren't comfortable doing it. But I just felt that overall there was this disappointment and a feeling among the guys that the unity of a team sort of was a bit of a victim. So it was a bit sad in a lot of ways. It was a wasted couple of months really. But look, I promise you, I'm the world's greatest optimist, and I think we'll get something out of that. And I'm hoping the players who did feel disappointed at what transpired, that they'll look forward. They got Joe there now, who's sensible about things. There's a bit of optimism around. And the other thing about that review, despite all the tales of woe from everyone, was by and large the rugby public were good about it. I know there's a lot of public criticism, but there's a lot of goodwill saying let's get back in the yard and fight as we know we can. So I always felt underpinning all that disappointment was some optimism, which I know it's really early days, but in terms of the review, there were a lot of words and jargon used. Ultimately, I think the main two things we wanted was let's get some common sense and let's get the right people. And I think that's where we're at. There's other hurdles to overcome now, but I think we've started off the right foot in 2024.
Yeah, there's certainly been some obviously some big changes since then. I'm actually interested in what you said earlier about enjoyment. I know I've come across some coaches who have thought high performance environments are not meant to be comfortable, are not meant to be, I don't know if enjoyable is the correct word, but where do you see that, like in the modern era? Where do you see that? Is it a case of you win and therefore you're happy? Like, is it chicken and egg, or where does enjoyment come into play in the modern game?
Yeah, well, I think whatever era to get to your best, Matt, and you'd understand this well, that you've got to be uncomfortable. There's got to be things that drive you up the wall and you get irritated by. Sometimes it's teammates, often it's coaches. But again, underpinning that stuff is respect and seeing where you're getting. Now, the scoreboard's got no emotion. It'll kick you in the guts from time to time. And to a degree, Australian rugby has found itself in a situation where now we're pretty reliant on the scoreboard in the early days, because if we'd just got knocked off by Wales, there'd be, I think, a bit more pessimism. But the fact that the scoreboards work for us, even though I think Joe would admit this, the performances have been patchy, really good in parts, but not brilliant in others. So I think, we're moving slowly, but do we have to win consistently? We've got to get to that stage where we're beating good teams regularly enough. And if we get that consistency, people and players will understand that, okay, the scoreboard's not always going to work for you, but by and large, you do the work, you go through those uncomfortable times, it'll have your head more often than not.
Slacky, just in terms of the review, did you have much or anything to do with the process of getting Joe Schmidt on board, or was it just very much looking at what's come, or how much was it in terms of looking forward the review as well?
No, it was nothing about that sort of stuff. It was all really to look back on when did that all happen? January? Yeah, when Dave Rennie, January through to October. It was that 10-month period, or however long that is, and what mistakes were made in that 8 or 9 months, and what potentially we could learn out of it. And it wasn't us doing the suggesting, it was us going to the players to say, what do you think? How do you think we can overcome? What were the problems? How do we overcome them? Looking forward. So it had, nothing to do with the choosing of Joe or whatever.
Yeah, right. So what have you made? Like you just used the word patchy. Clearly, wins over Wales and 3 wins in a row helps just take away the sting of last year, change the narrative. But there's a big step up, isn't there, when you're taking on the Springboks in a few weeks' time, August 10 in Brisbane.
Yeah, well, again, as the leader of the pack there, Joe understands that better than anyone, and he knows it, and he knows that. I haven't spoken to him since the Test matches, but he'll know they were patchy, really good in parts, and but not good enough for the next step up. So look, what can you do but just work away and keep looking to improve? The difficulty will be, I think, is selection-wise now. What do you do? You've got so many options. Where do you go? A few things were proved in the last 3 matches, and a few things were left up in the air. And, the three of us, if they asked us to pick 15 to start or a team of 23, we'd definitely all have different opinions. So, it's the pressure's on, but that's what it's about at that level.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because Matt and I got Matt to ask his Wallabies 23 about maybe 6 weeks ago, and we had about 2 players out of whack there. But I tend to agree that it's so open, a lot of the spots, but also 10 debutants. At least half of those really put a good step forward, and their stocks have probably gone up. And I think of guys like Josh Fluke and Isaac Kalia, Jeremy Williams. The 3 of those have been outstanding over the last month. One of the great reasons why we asked you to come on today was on Friday at Ballymore. Gordon Bray was there, the release of his book in Brisbane and Queensland. There was a whole host of Queenslanders and Australian greats there. Can you just bring us into Ballymore in the middle of the day there and Gordon, and what the feeling and vibe was like when John Eales is there and George Smith and a couple of those great names, Mark Lone type figures?
Yeah, look, it was good. I mean, I had admired Gordon doing such a task. Having written a book once, I know how hard it is and how time-consuming and whatever. So the fact that he did it was good. The fact that it was done at a time where rugby needs something was great. And look, I don't go over the top. I don't think about, how wonderful rugby is, although I think it is, and how many opportunities it's given so many of us and how many friends, etc., etc. But that room had a bit of a feel about it because, I've known Loney and Corny and these guys forever, and there were some others there through the course of the years, not so much the last 5 or so years, but certainly the professional era from Ealesy and the Herbert brothers, etc., etc. And there was just a really pleasant feel about it. And, like all these things, it's a subjective call on who's in and who's out. But any discussion was really good-natured. I voted for Matt Toomua to be there, but he just missed out.
I had words with Gordon a few weeks ago, actually, Andrew. So I made it clear, but I just said it probably got down to the fact my last name's a bit hard to spell. Horan seems a bit easier.
And is it 2 T's or 1 with Matthew?
I don't even know half the time, so I understand it, completely get it.
Yeah,
it was a grammatical issue.
That's it.
What do you think? In all seriousness, there were some handy players that were left out of the chosen 15 that he initially or that he put down. I'm not sure if you've had time to read the book yet, but I'm sure you would have skimmed through the 15 that he chose. John Eales there, Ken Catchpole, some quality players. Who do you think's the stiffest to miss out?
Well, there's 11 backs and 4 forwards, as Matt and I would understand the logic behind that. The one thing I felt after it, and again, I haven't spoken to Gordon about this, but I certainly would say it if he asked me what I thought. I looked at it at the end and thought George was the youngest, Georgie Smith, and you can't judge these things by chronology or how old or young a certain person is. But if it were in my hands, now obviously that all those guys played in reasonably successful eras, maybe not so much of the early ones, but so the last 10 or 15 years, we haven't been, out of this world successful. So individuals potentially missed out. But I'd have thought, and he probably did, but I thought Michael Hooper would have come into that conversation, to play as often as he did, as well as he did, to just getting that, what we talked about earlier, that sort of emotionless scoreboard not helping him much. He'd probably be my side, and I'd love to have had well, he's not current because he's just retired, but, he'd have been there for me. But every single player there or person picked, I think there was a good, sound, logical reason for it all.
Do you think there's a position in Australian rugby that we've been more blessed, for want of a better word, than our open side? Because I often view the open side, Australian open side, as say an English tight head or an English second rower, a New Zealand fullback. Like, it just seems like a position we consistently produced world-class players.
Yeah, mate, you're dead right. I've had a theory which is not popular with open sides flankers, in that it must be a bloody easy position to play because there's so many good ones. So I haven't had support from them on that. But your point is completely correct. Mate, I doubt there's been a bad one, has it? I mean, people will have forgotten guys like David Wilson probably in that sort of conversation. But the dime a dozen. We have been. You're not going to get an argument from me on that, Matt.
Hey, Andrew, we could talk to you all night long, and we've really only just skimmed the surface of the review, but also the Joe Schmidt start to his tenure, and very much Friday's great luncheon into the Queensland Reds heartbreaker, where they lost by a point to Wales. But we've got to talk a bit of sevens. We're going to talk to Anthony Eddy as well. But Slacky, so good to see you. Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. Thanks, Matt.
Hey, changing gears really quickly from the 15s to the 7s. We might come back to the Wallabies and the Rugby Championship squad later on. But for now, the Olympics is just around the corner. Australia is going to start their campaign, the men anyway, against Samoa at 11:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. On Wednesday night, a couple of days before the opening ceremony, before the women kickstart their campaign against South Africa at 12 a.m. on Monday morning. So if you're a rugby fan, hopefully you've got your coffee and your midnight snacks ready. But before then, Anthony Eddy, you come back from Ireland. You spent a long time in the game. Welcome back. Where are you and what's doing?
Yeah, thanks, Christy. It's nice to be back. Yeah, I've been back nearly almost 2 years now, and I've sort of set up a sports management business with high performance reviews and a small boutique business around players and coaches. Still heavily involved in rugby. Still watch a lot of club rugby and even some school rugby as well. So, and a keen advocate of the Sevens program. So excited about the Olympics.
Well, before we get into that, you and Matt know each other. I wouldn't say necessarily really well, but quite well, right?
Yeah, we know each other. We go back a long way, actually. When Matt first went down to the Brumbies as a young fellow, and he was in the Australian under-20s, and I was coaching him there for a couple of years through that period, and followed his progress with great delight and fantastic career that he had as well. So,
yeah, thanks. I remember that. It was I think 2009, Japan, and we had a pretty successful. Well, a couple of years actually. We made the final the year later, albeit one game short. But yeah, it was a good time. Nussie was there as well. We had all sorts of players, Kurtley Beale, and yeah, it was a good enjoyable time.
Yeah, we had a good squad, good pathway.
Yeah. Tell me, Anthony, did Matt reach his ceiling? Did he excel as well as you might have thought when he was a teenager coming through the ranks?
Yeah, I think he did. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, anyone who progresses out of the 20s and goes and represents the Wallabies at senior level, you've got to say that they've progressed pretty well. So, yeah.
Where do you see our 20s program at these days? Is it obviously it's a little bit different now with all the junior pathways and the setup and the national academies and things like that? Where do you see us placed in that regard?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think they probably play more games than what they did back in our day. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe there was a bit of a the program might have been a little bit more intense back in those days as well. I'm not too sure, but I know the academies had a very close eye on all their players back during those periods. And to be perfectly honest, I've been away from Australia so long now, I'm not sort of sure where that all fits. But I know Grazy's done a great job over the last few years with the 20s, and they were unfortunate to miss out on a game against Ireland over there in South Africa this year. But still, good squad of players. They've done well.
Yeah, all sorts of drama that came out of the 20s competition, just taken out by England in recent days. So it continues to show England and their strength. They were dominant just a few years ago, and they're back at those lofty ranks. Let's jump into Ireland Sevens, because you spent a long time over with David Nusafora. You would have worked alongside Joe Schmidt, I imagine, at times. The progression of people like Hugo Keenan from the Sevens program into the 15s program. And now you're back in Australia. But with the Olympics just days away, what are you excited about? How's Ireland going to go? How's Australia going to go, do you think? And give us some insights into Nasi and his role as well in getting the Sevens program cooking.
Yeah, I'm excited about the Olympics with the Sevens program, because obviously it's the pinnacle. I think all the unions that qualify for the Olympics or have the aspirations to, they put everything into that year around going to the Olympics and potentially winning gold medals. The Ireland program, wow, that's taken me back a long way now, Christy, because that started from scratch. They had no sevens. So David went over there, and then when I finished at Rugby Australia, I went over there and set up the sevens program from nothing. So we had to qualify through the lowest division of Rugby Europe. So you were travelling off to some most unusual countries around Europe to go through those processes to qualify. It took us a couple of years to get potentially the opportunity to qualify through Hong Kong. But yeah, the boys and girls have been enormously committed to the program for a period of time, and a number of those players are still there now. So I've got a lot of good friends both in the women's program and the men's program. So I wish them all the success in the world, and it'd be fantastic for Ireland rugby actually to pick up a medal. And I suppose from my position, it'd be great to see Australia and Ireland in the gold medal playoff in both the men's and the women's. If I could have a wish, that'd be it.
Yeah, well, let's go into firstly a couple of those weird and wacky countries or cities that you might have gone to in Europe. Where's the wackiest?
Bosnia would be up there probably, with a long jump pit under the goalposts in the dead ball area. So that became, the try celebration area, especially when Ireland was running around with a decent team, whacking up 50 or 60 points in a game of sevens. So, dives and all sorts of try celebrations were part of the party back then. Well, you more or less go to, if you're playing in that Rugby Europe tournament, which is a good tournament, a quality tournament, once you get to the top tier. But it's a good pathway for the sevens program. And you mentioned the likes of Hugo Keenan, and there's others such as Jimmy O'Brien and Robert Ballacoon, and even Tyg Byrne, who plays in the second row or back row there for Ireland. He was in the sevens program there for a while too. So we sort of had our eye on a lot of talent that we knew that we could develop through the sevens program that would go on and represent Ireland in 15s. And as a result of that, they've had enormous success, which is fantastic.
And it obviously took you a lot of patience and forward planning, to get Ireland to where they are now in that sevens program. And to be fair, elements in the 15s. Do you see it taking a bit of time, this kind of rebuild of Australian rugby? Obviously with Peter Horn and Joe Schmidt coming in, is it going to take time?
Yeah, I think it is, Matt. Like, the likes of Peter and Joe with enormous experience, they've got a plan as to where they want to go to, and ultimately they've got to bring everyone along on that journey. But it is going to take time, because there's going to be a bit of buy-in from the 4 provinces now, and developing your academy structures as to how that works, and also just your youth programs and your where the sevens program fits now in Australia, because it was always back in my day, and also what we did in Ireland, it was always like a fifth Super Rugby team, or like a fifth province in Ireland, where it's a development pathway to try and fast track players and teach them to be professional as quickly as possible, because that's what the sevens program is. You travel the world and you got to learn fast.
Do you see some necessary skills transferring in the sevens, particularly with, you know, teams like South Africa doing 6-2, 7-1 benches, having that versatility, that competency and breakdown work all across the park. Do you see that being quite relevant in terms of the sevens translating to 15s?
Mate, massive. Yeah, just the skill set. And you know, if you're a Sevens fan, like, it's not touch footy. It's an enormously physical game, and your tackle and breakdown work has to be just as good, if not better, in the game of sevens than what it is in the 15s. You know, like you play a game against New Zealand, and you know you're going to get counteracted every breakdown. Well, Ireland do anyway, but things like that are just so important around just your skill set, and even just your catch pass skills, Matt, and your one-on-one tackles. Those sorts of things are so important. And I think it's probably an area that we could potentially put a bit more focus on.
Yeah, speaking of areas of importance, I know this might be a bit of a long-winded answer, but where have other countries overtaken us from a governance or HP perspective? Where are we? You know, obviously early 2000s, we're probably leading in quite a few areas. And then I know personally, we used to see yourself and Nasi overseas, you know, doing great things. And it felt, you know, like where have countries overtaken us? And yeah, where do we need to go?
It's a good question. I don't know if I have the answer. I think like a lot of those countries probably, you know, had a clear vision of what they could do in a period of time and probably stuck to that. Also, you know, in Europe it's a bit different, as you'd know too, because the competition structures are so much different than what they are down in the Southern Hemisphere. You know, the loss of South Africa out of Super Rugby potentially is, you know, probably caused some problems for Southern Hemisphere rugby, but it's for the benefit of the Northern Hemisphere, you'd probably guess. And their competitions, their competition structures and their competitions, because of the geography of, you know, a number of those countries, it just makes it so much easier than what you have to work with in Australia and also the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah, you could keep talking about all those issues. Where do you think that David Nucifora, who's a consultant at the moment, he's going to finish up after the Olympics with Ireland and then probably come back to Oz a month or two later? I think he's got a residence in the Gold Coast. Where do you think he and Peter Horton can make some differences in the next couple of years, leading into a Lions series next year, as well as a Home World Cup in 27 for the men and 29 for the women?
He's probably the best person to answer that. But look, you know, he and Peter have known each other for a long time, so I'm sure they'll just sort of put their heads together and come up with a clear strategy. And one thing I know about David is he's very driven and focused, so there'll be a good programs put in place around talent identification. And Peter will be exactly the same with regards to this, and so too will Joe. But, you know, having a clear vision of where you want to be at the end of the Lions tour, leading into a Home World Cup, and those sorts of things are just so important. And they're the things I think where David and Peter will work well together to be able to actually put a strategy in place to have success.
Well, before we let you go, obviously medals up for grab. Ireland will certainly be targeting medals in both the men and the women. We saw that the Irish women took out the Perth Sevens earlier in the year. They've made huge progress over the last couple of seasons. The men have reached finals, have been regularly in the top four. Australia too, the women have to be considered gold medal favourites. The men in a similar position to the Irish, always, or very often anyway, reaching the pointy end. Where do you think those two sides, will they medal? Or who do you think the favourites are for both the men and the women?
I think, as you said, Australia would definitely be the favourites for the women. They've had, not just this season, but the last 4 or 5 years, they've just been dominant. And, you know, it's a credit to what, you know, the staff have done with that program really ever since Rio. So they'd be the favourites. But it won't be easy for them because, as you said, Ireland are competitive now. New Zealand have been very good and very consistent over the last 12 months, 24 months. And France on their day, particularly being a home Olympics for them, they're a really good team. And on their day, they could beat any of those teams as well. And when you look at the men, Ireland could potentially pick up a medal. Definitely, they could easily pick up a gold medal out of that, I would think. And so too New Zealand. And as you said, Australia have always been competitive just because of the athletes and the skill set that they have. So Sevens can be a funny game. You sort of hope that it doesn't come down to, a bounce of the ball or a unfortunate sin bin or something like that determines who wins the gold medals. But there's probably I would think there's potentially 4 teams in both the men's and the women's that could walk away with a gold medal.
Yeah, you think even about Argentina and Marcus Manenta, he just makes such a big difference to the Argentinian side. And, of course, Antoine Dupont's transition has just been unbelievably seamless too. So 80,000 expected at the Stade de France over the next week. So excited for that. Good to have you home in Oz, Anthony. I'm sure people like David will be just touching in on your services at particular points in time as well. But great to have another person with rugby intellect back in the game in Australia.
Nice to be back. Thanks, Christy. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Ant. Good to see you.
Well, it probably goes to show how competitive the Sevens circuit is at the moment when Fiji, the double gold medalists, aren't necessarily the first side that you consider being right there at the pointy end. But behind me, it's going to be so competitive, this particularly the men's side of the Sevens.
Yeah, who would have thought 8 years ago we would be mentioning Ireland or France, in the Sevens part of the game. I think that's really cool. It's exciting. It's definitely one of, if not the fastest growing aspect of our game. And to have the Sevens men's, but also obviously the women's, something that we love to support because our girls do so well. So yeah, I'm pumped. I'll be ready for a few late nights, but it'll be well worth it.
Yeah, totally, absolutely. And it's a bit of a weird one with the men, particularly where they have their first 2 days of competition, then there's the break for the opening ceremony, and then they get straight into a couple of the massive finals and the final day there. So the women, they've got it probably a bit easier in terms of they can play their few days straight without a break in the middle. But I'd say that the women definitely are favourites to top their pool. The men with Samoa, Kenya, and Argentina as their big test. So they would be really hopeful that they come away with a win over Samoa first up. If they do that, then Kenya, you expect to beat them. They weren't part of the World Series this year. And Argentina obviously won it with Maneta missing the last few tournaments, but still way too good. Let's just go back to the Wallabies for a moment. The Rugby Championship, August 10 is the first match. A squad likely to be named either at the end of this month or the first couple of days of next month. Who do you think? It seems to me like Will Skelton's a 50-50 proposition to be named at the moment. There's probably a few underlying reasons for that. Corabetti's more of a favourite, more likely to return, 2-time John Eales medalist. Perhaps Filippo Daungunu, whether or not he's suspended for his upgraded red card, could also come into play with that. But would you be surprised if there's only 1 or 2 foreign players, or is this kind of just the reality under Joe Schmidt, where it's an Australian first policy that he's kind of implementing?
Yeah, look, these are probably the questions that I think we're attributing to Joe Schmidt is unfair because he's a rugby coach, and I feel like it's not his job to grow the game or to worry about the game in that sense. It's his job to win a game, and I feel like I would find it very hard to believe that he'd be saying no to Will Skelton, no to, these guys overseas who can really add to our program. So I do feel like this is probably a question for the higher ups or the guys sitting next to him. In particular, a guy like Peter Horn, is this what we're going for? It would be good to get a little bit of clarity, I feel. I know they're probably making it up as they go as well. And fair enough, there's a lot of moving parts, results come into play, but it it would be quite nice if we got some clarity over this. I don't know how you feel, but I feel like that would, yeah, you'd feel like we're come along the journey and would know what to expect, but it feels a little bit, yeah.
Well, Joe Schmidt's being pretty clear that his strong preference is to pick from home. He did leave the door ajar slightly on Saturday at his press conference following the win over Georgia by saying, look, if we end up looking abroad, then possibly, but we're pretty happy with what we're seeing here at the moment. And to be fair to him, you did see some progression. You did see some players take opportunities. I still think we're light on if we don't go to a Skelton or an Arnold, particularly at the Maul. Like, that still struggled against Georgia, the defensive Maul as well. I know that one or two occasions they managed to bring it down, but this is the Box. This is the world champions. You don't just suddenly become a top-tier nation or indeed a top-tier player overnight.
Yeah, definitely. And you think back to the Wales game, that was kind of the only part of the game that kept them in. The Welsh, they mauled us close to the line, and so yeah, you get a bit nervous about that. Like I said, yeah, like, Joe's got to have those comments. He's got to say that because he's motivating his 23, back in camp, and he can't be coming out saying, "Oh, Will's back next week," because then that just demotivates his current crop of second rowers. So. Yeah, look, it's wishful thinking perhaps, but it would be nice if, from my point of view, if, Peter Horn came out and he said, yeah, we're not picking from overseas this year, end of, and then from a player's point of view, guys who are thinking about going overseas, they have clear boundaries. They can't go. I think, to be fair to them, they're probably not doing that because if we lost these 3 tests, that so-called policy would have only been written in pencil, I think.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And I had a conversation with Phil Waugh earlier today, and before he's off to London for a meeting with the British and Irish Lions, and then going across the English Channel to watch the Aussies at the Olympics. And he started out going, mate, we've got to organise a few more matches against the likes of Chile and Portugal, and just to continue the win rate. And that was totally said, and he said it was in tongue in cheek, but there was a bit to be said about getting some momentum. Usually Australia starts off their campaign against either South Africa and Pretoria or the All Blacks, perhaps here or the next week in New Zealand. It's difficult to have a great strike rate when you're playing the 2 best sides in the world who have got, 7 World Cups between them. So 7 of the 10 World Cups. So it's no surprise that the Wallabies don't always get off to a strong start, but really good to be able to celebrate a few wins. I imagine that the squad will be pretty similar. Liam Wright, there's a fair bit of talk around him perhaps needing surgery. They're debating about what happens with him. Is it a shoulder? Is it the nerve? Is it bicep? They're being tight-lipped about his injury, but it doesn't seem like it's a great one. He'll be long odds, you imagine, to make that TRC squad, which is such a shame, given that he was the 89th captain less than a month ago. Others on the injury comeback trail, Angus Bell doesn't look like he'll be right for a good month. Dave Parecki probably towards the back end of the TRC. Jordan Bataille still a couple of weeks away before he's going to be in the selection frame himself. So I can't see too much movement in the squad.
Yeah, on that, as someone who's been covering the game for quite a while, what's the downside of Rugby Australia giving us updates on these things? Is there, taking us along the journey a little bit more? Actually coming out and saying, yeah, we're checking this, and I don't know. I just feel like the days of being real stone-faced and not giving anything seems to be kind of gone, and we're a lot more about content. We're a lot more about getting people along with the journey and, treating fans. Does that frustrate you as someone who follows it, or do you understand it?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because, look, I wrote the story almost 3 weeks ago when Len Ikitau had a hammy injury, and the Wallabies were saying, oh, he's okay. Like, I've just seen him and he's fine. He's in camp. And then the Wallabies were asked around Lenny Ikitau's potential injury, and they all had been told, a certain response. And we know that then Nikitau misses the next week because of a hamstring injury and then misses the second match as well. So I find at times it can be frustrating, but that's the job of a journo, right? To get some information out. And that's why I'll continue to try to, break news, because I think it's important, not just to get accurate information, but I agree. I think any news is really important news to get out there now. We know that if you look at the newspapers, particularly the News Corp papers, you've got to go through 10 pages before you might see 2 paragraphs of rugby in there. So it's totally important, I think, to bring the punter along the journey. And 26,000 there on the weekend. I think they're going to be full houses at Suncorp Stadium for the Box game as well as in Perth. So that's a really pleasing, positive thing. It's good for not just the spectacle, but also from a financial perspective. That's a great result if you get a couple of sellouts there. So a lot to look forward to over the next couple of weeks. You got to get your tickets pretty quickly if you're hoping to see the Wallabies play South Africa.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, that's been one huge positive over the last few years is been the crowds, like particularly to the Wallabies games. It's just been, the support has been awesome. Like it really has. We saw an England series in, what was that, 22 maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, like amazingly well supported. Obviously those COVID few years made it a little bit difficult for everyone around. But then even last year, it is really cool. There's a genuine hunger there. And a desire to see us succeed again. And, like a few wins helps and stuff like that. But I tell you what, that's been a huge, we cop a lot. But our Wallabies games have been, very well supported. And that's always comforting to see.
Yeah, and shout out. I think it was a good atmosphere there on Saturday afternoon. Great to see some Marvo footy. The game itself was open and it probably had a contributing effect to the manner that it was played. You look across in San Diego and the All Blacks and what they managed to turn on. Their hands, their running game was in full force in dry conditions. So awesome to see that.
I also enjoyed, to get a bit controversial, I also enjoyed the referee in that game, Matthew Carley, I think it was. One criticism I had of the referee in our game was just the lack of communication. It just seemed very punitive, just no communication, then penalty. And it was like, there was no kind of, I don't know, there's sometimes you get referees who don't see themselves as a part of the game. It's just there to police it. And I think we're missing something when that's the case.
Last thing before we go, the Dangunu upgraded red card. Were you a fan, not a fan? Did you think it was a penalty? What did you think on that?
I thought it was an awful red card. Like, for me, red cards, there needs to be some level of poor intent or poor technique. He's jumped in the air. I think some people have said he actually touched the ball. And then he's obviously got his knee up because he's bracing to be hit. And it's in my view, it's a clear rugby incident. You give it a penalty maybe to say, like, we can't be seen as encouraging, headbutting knees. But that being said, like, there needs to be an allowance there for a rugby incident. Like, the game is played at such warp speed with so many decisions, with so much reactions, or, unfortunately, you're just going to get some of these things. And I thought it was really poor, to be honest. And whenever you review things like that in that depth, it doesn't look great. But I don't know, rugby incident in mine. How do you feel?
Yeah, that was my initial thought. And I saw it live. And yes, Joe Schmidt and others are saying that he touched the ball. If you touch the ball, I think, well, you've kind of done what you were there to do, which was to do a charge down. The other thing that frustrated me there was all the replays, particularly the on-field replays, were all close-ins. They didn't actually see how far Dangunu was away from the kicker, the left winger, when he jumped in the air. If you just zoom in and you show the contact of the knee to their head, sure, you might come to a conclusion. But if you don't actually see how that happened, I think then you're just doing it injustice there, because I tend to agree. I think it was tough. Richard Cockerell's comments, the Georgian coach, was pretty sympathetic. He was glad that there was a 20-minute red card so that it didn't necessarily destroy the game. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I would have been okay and comfortable enough with a penalty, but anything more, I thought, it's not more than a yellow card. And look, the Wallabies got away with the win there. One thing I'll say about Dunguna as well is that every match that he plays for the Wallabies, he's always either tackling someone in the air or, as we saw on the weekend, colliding with someone in the air. So he's definitely an area he needs to ensure that he improves so he doesn't put himself in a position there for referees to come down hard on him. Hey, good to talk to Anthony Eddy. Good to talk to Andrew Slack. A fair bit to talk about there, despite the fact no 15s matches this weekend from a professional perspective anyway. But Queensland on their way to play Tonga. A great tour for them to look forward to. And, of course, the Sevens over the next week. So enjoy that. Hopefully we'll be celebrating some gold in a week's time. But until then, Matt Toomua, thanks for joining the Raw Rugby podcast.
See you soon.